Pokemon! Interesting. Always looking for more Pokemon, but can't really find them. Oh wow. I guess we can read. And what do we have here? Well, hello everyone! Rocket Wayne is here to jump into a really fun adventure, as today we read Bunnicula, the Celery Stalks at Midnight. Always remember that as we go through these amazing stories and read these outstanding adventures, all you have to do is press the CC button in your YouTube link in order to follow along with the words. Now I think that Madam Owl will be perfect to join us for today's adventure. Now that Madam Owl is here, let's jump in. The Celery Stalks at Midnight. Chapter 1, The Disappearance. It was not a dark and stormy night. Indeed, there was nothing in the elements to foreshadow the events that lay ahead. Chester, Howie, and I gathered on the front porch for a bit of post-dinner snoozing. I was stretched out on my back, my paws dangling at my sides, thinking of nothing more than the meal I had just eaten and the chocolate treat I'd hoped I might still lie ahead. After all, it was Friday night, the one night of the week Toby was allowed to stay up and read as late as he wanted, and that meant snacks. Snacks to be shared with his old pal Harold. That's me. Chester, curled up on an open comic book nearby, purred contentedly. Only Howie, who was growling as he chewed vigorously on a rawhide bone, seemed unable to relax. But all that high-strung energy was natural, I suppose, considering he was still just a puppy. Boy, this is the life, huh, Uncle Harold? Hal asked between growls. I replied, with as much vigor as I could muster, which wasn't much. After all, I wasn't a puppy anymore, and I had lost most of my energy long ago. I listened to the sound of children playing down the block somewhere. There's nothing like hanging out on the porch after a good meal, Howie went on enthusiastically. He lifted up his quivering nostrils to the air and sniffed rapidly. Ah, smell the night air, What's that? Someone's having a, what do you call it? What is it when they cook outside, Pop? Chester raised his eyelid. A barbecue, he said with a yawn. Oh yeah, gee, I have so much to learn. But you and Uncle Harold have taught me a lot already. He gazed admiringly at Chester. Thanks, Pop, he said. Chester raised another eyelid and shook his head. He turned his gaze from Howie to me. Why does this kid keep calling me Pop? He asked. I'm not his father. I'm not even a dog. If anyone around here should be Pop, it should be you, Harold. Dogs of a feather should stick together and all that. Howie chuckled. That's a good one, Pop. Dogs of a feather. I'll have to remember that one. I didn't even attempt to answer Chester's question. After all, Chester, who doesn't hold dogs in particularly high regard, did seem an odd choice of a father figure for a young pup. But Howie, who had recently come to live with us, had formed his attachment right away, and there was no breaking of it now. Too bad the rabbit couldn't come out here too, Howie went on with a nod toward the living room. It's not fair, his having to be cooped up in the cage all the time. I'm afraid that's a rabbit's fate, I said. At least for a domesticated one. Though, I must agree with you, Howie. I feel sorry for Bunnicula. Save your sympathy, Chester Money. Bunnicula is no ordinary rabbit. If he ever got out, and let's not forget that once upon a time he did, Harold, he'd try to stir up trouble. Are you still convinced? I started to say, but stopped myself, not wanting to alarm young Howie with Chester's theories of Bunnicula's true identity. Chester looked up mildly surprised. Of course I am, he replied. Can there be any doubt? You saw the evidence for yourself, Harold. Howie looked back and forth from Chester to me. What are you talking about, he asked. Oh, nothing. I thought of the cuddly little bunny rabbit who'd become my friend, of the hours we'd spent snuggling in front of the crackling fires on cold, warm nights, of the time I've saved him for Chester's attempt to starve him to death. That rabbit is a vampire, Chester said matter-of-factly. Howie's head jerked up. The rawhide bone stumbled from the front steps. What? A vampire, he gasped? Then, a moment later, what's a vampire? I felt obliged to step in and save Howie from the seamier facts of life. A vampire, explained, is a person who calls the rules during a baseball game. Don't confuse the kid, Chester said, bathing his paw. And don't be such a Pollyanna. Turning to Howie, he said, a vampire is a creature, once dead, who sucks the blood out of other living things in order to live. Howie's eyes widened in amazement. What? He stammered. So far, our friend Bunnicula hadn't attacked people. Chester went on calmly. Or cats or dogs, for that matter. But he has drained the juices out of vegetables, turning them ghostly white. He came to live with us when our family, one night the Moreaus went to the movies, I said, picking up the story, and found Bunnicula lying in a dirt-filled box on one of the seats. Don't forget which movie, Chester interrupted. Dracula, I conceded. But that doesn't mean nonsense. In this case, everything means something. Don't you think it's significant that shortly after Bunnicula's arrival, the vegetables in the kitchen started turning white? And wasn't it strange that they did so during the night, the only time Bunnicula wasn't asleep? Wasn't it stranger still that he could get out of his cage by his own powers, without even undoing the lock? And what about those marks found on the drained vegetables? 2 tiny holes that matched perfectly to that rabbit's oddly shaped teeth, or should I say fangs. I know, I said impatiently. We've been through all this before, but I'm still not convinced. Nothing will ever convince you, Harold. I wouldn't be surprised if that bunny's got his powers over you. Listen, Howie. Yes, Pop? Chester rolled his eyes and went on. You can't listen to Harold on this one. He's too much of a goody two-shoes. And the Monroes, well, what can I say? People are, alas, people. And, as such, woefully in the dark most of the time. They never had a clue what was going on. I was on the verge of destroying the vampire bunny once and for all, saving this town and all its inhabitants from its evil clutches, when the Monroes whisked him off to the vet and got him a liquid diet. Since then, he's had no need to suck the juices out of vegetables. A blender does the work for him. Modern technology has once again saved the day. But, and here Chester furrowed his brow ominously, you can take the rabbit out of the vampire, but you can't take the vampire out of the rabbit. Huh? I inquired. I don't get it, Howie said, scratching behind his ear with his back paw. You can't take the... Oh, never mind. What I'm trying to say is that I still believe if, for any reason, Bunnicula were deprived of his liquid vegetables, or had the opportunity to run away, he'd be back to his old tricks in no time. Howie was so aroused by Chester's story, he was panting slightly. Wow, he said, trying to catch his breath. And all this time, I thought he was just a little bunny. He is a nice little bunny, I asserted, feeling the need to defend my friend. Don't listen to Chester. Don't listen to Harold. Chester, I said. Harold? Pop! Uncle Harold, Howie barked. Stop arguing, you're confusing me. I think I'd better run out and chase the car clear of my mind. Excuse me. Howie started down the steps when Mrs. Monroe appeared at the door. Hello, boy, she said warmly. I was wondering where you disappeared to. Howie, come back here. I told you not to run out into the street. Rats, Howie muttered under his breath. He turned his face upward toward the door and began whimpering. Now that won't do any good. Come on, she said. It's getting late. Time to come in for the night. We're all going to bed. Howie and I began being obedient dog types that started for the door. Chester, a cat, lingered on his comic book, looking up at Mrs. Monroe with singular disinterest. She went over and picked him up. Let's go in, you little cutie, she cooed. Sleepy time. Chester grimaced. Little cutie, sleepy time? Good grief, I heard him mumble. We entered the living room to find Toby and Pete, the Monroe's 2 sons, staring into the television as if they'd been hypnotized. I went over to Toby's side to see what it was all about. Gotcha, Toby yelled suddenly, making me jump. Pete bounced and twitched all over the floors as he frantically turned some dials back and forth. The little blobs of light started darting all over the screen. Weird noises, squawks and beeps and screeches emanated inside the television. I think our TV's possessed, I whispered to Chester, who jumped down from Mrs. Monroe's arms to join us. Don't panic, Harold, he reassured me. I'll take care of it. Slowly he skulked across the floor, his eyes never straying on the flecks of light that dashed maniacally on the screen. Every time 2 of them collided, another hideous screech was heard. When that happened, Chester's head jerked and his eyes widened. A little more hair shot along his back. Suddenly he pounced with his paws racing across the screen. He tried to catch the stream of light. Chester, Pete called. Get away from there! Yeah, Chester, Toby joined in. Come on, you're ruining the game. I was a little surprised at Toby, who was usually more patient than his brother. He now seemed transformed as Pete by the strange new enterprise of theirs. All right, boys, said Mrs. Monroe said, touching them lightly on the tops of their head. That's enough star thrower for the night. Star eater, Mom. Yeah, Mom, jeez. Star thrower, star eater, whatever. It's time to call it quits and go to bed. Toby, you want time to sit up and read, don't you? Yeah, I guess, Toby said. Chester was still trying to catch the elusive stars. Just one more game, Mom, okay? No, it's not okay. Robert. Mr. Monroe put down the book he was reading in a chair nearby. You boys have a big day tomorrow, he said. I think you'd better get some sleep. You heard your mother. No more star catching. Star eater, dear, said Mrs. Monroe. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2... Okay, Pete said. And with a click, the stars disappeared from the television screen. Chester, his front paws stretched out on the screen, looked dazed. Everybody to bed now. Okay, we're going, the boys started up the stairs. I planned to follow them, when suddenly I noticed Howie run up to Chester and whisper excitedly, Pop, Pop! Chester kept blinking his eyes at the screen, as if to trying to figure out what happened. What, kid? Pop, What you said about Bunnicula, your warning, what is about it? I glanced over at the rabbit's cage. Chester, I gasped. Chester dropped down and looked at us. What's the matter with you two? Hal and I barely could contain ourselves and blurted out, the rabbit's gone. Look, he's not in the cage. With a start, Chester looked at the empty cage, sitting on the table by the window. Where do you suppose he is? I asked. Quick, Chester commanded. To the kitchen. Where are you off to in such a rush? Mrs. Monroe asked, as we rushed by our legs. You were just fed. I'm afraid no more food miraculously reappeared in your dishes. That's too bad, I thought, as we tumbled through the swinging door to the skidded to a halt on linoleum. All was quiet. The refrigerator door was closed. A bowl of fruit sat undisturbed on the kitchen table. We listened unattentedly for the breathing, or hoping. All was quiet. The refrigerator door was closed. A bowl of fruit sat undisturbed on the kitchen table. We listened attentively for breathing, or hopping, or whatever noises rabbits make when they are running away. There wasn't a sound. Gee, Pop, he's not here, Howie said. Chester looked wildly about, his mind clicking away all the while. We've got to warn the Monroes, he said at last. Come on. We dashed back to the living room. The boys were already on upstairs, and my thoughts strayed to Toby, who no doubt was already settling to bed with his latest book and an array of snacks. If I didn't hurry to help him out, he'd be forced to eat them all by himself. I headed for the stairs. Chester grabbed me by the tail. Where do you think you're going? He asked, in a somewhat garbled voice. I'm hearkened by the call of chocolate, I replied. Well, hearken to this before you go any further, he said. We've got to alert the Monroes to what's going on. Now you and Howie start the whimpering. I'll jump up on Bunnicula's cage. Well, all right. I agreed somewhat reluctantly, for Bunnicula's sake. Mr. Monroe, who was turning off the lights, Mrs. Monroe stood at the bottom of the stairs ready to go up. A pile of clothes were in their arms. Howie and I sank to our sides, whimpered pathetically. What's the matter? She asked, her voice full of concern. You want some water? She asked, turning to her husband. Robert, why don't you check the water dishes before coming out? I want to start folding this laundry. I noticed Chester had jumped up on the top of the cage, but as that was part of the room was darkened already, no one paid any attention. Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs, and Mr. Monroe went to the kitchen. Chester jumped down. When Mr. Monroe re-entered, he stood looking down at us, shaking his head. I don't know what your problem is, fellas, he said, but you've got plenty of water. Once again, I started to whimper, and Howie tugged at Mr. Monroe's legs. Chester, meanwhile, began hopping around the living room floor, looking as though he was trying to make his way over a patch of hot tar. Mr. Monroe just smiled. Well, Chester, it looks like you're still full of energy. Too bad we can't let you out. Good night. He patted each of us and went to bed. Gee, Pop, are you okay? He asked. Can I help you? You can help by not being so dumb, Chester muttered, a disgusting look on his face. I was trying to be a rabbit. Howie became confused. Why would you want to be a rabbit, he asked. Aren't you happy being a cat? I moved towards the stairs, the lure of crinkling cellophane, covering, I hoped, chocolate cupcakes, too strong to resist. Chester called after me. Harold, take the kid with you, will you? I've got to plan my strategy. I want to stay with you, Pop, Howie said. Chester groaned. What strategy? I said. We've got to find that rabbit and return him to his cage before it's too late. Too late for what? I asked. I'm concerned about Bunnicula too, but it's not the rabbit I'm worried about, he said. It's us, you fool. I shuddered to think what could happen one little night with that bunny on the loose. Well, I replied, I'll let you worry about that. I've got bigger worries on my stomach, mind, right now. I went up the stairs. I could hear Chester murmuring about rabbits and vegetables and vampires, and I knew his would be a restless night. But I reassured myself he would have Howie at his side to get him through, and what a comfort that would be. After all, just as I turned the corner of the landing, didn't I hear Howie remark, well, Pop, you know what they always say? No, son, Chester answered. What do they say? Hair today, gone tomorrow. Oh, wow. That was a very interesting adventure. What did you think, Madam Owl? I like that part too. We'll see you in the next adventure, okay? And we'll see you in the next adventure, here with Wayne Reeves. This is Rocket Wayne saying thank you for stopping by. And I can't wait to see you on the next adventure. Bye-bye.